Good evening, everybody. My name is Shannon Sean. I'm here with Sean Shinnock. We're here to talk to you about my book, Turning Points. We have a lot to cover. Later in the broadcast, we will be joined by Dr. Michael Janicki, professor of psychiatry, Harvard Medical School, and lots of other accolades. We will get into that. But let me say welcome to Sean. How are you doing tonight, Sean?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Awesome. Yeah, it's very exciting. So I want to cover a little bit of admin before we go. So you'll be able to post comments and questions, and we will see them, Sean and I, and we will try to address them more likely at the end of the presentation that we have. So don't feel like we're ignoring you, but there are points that we actually want to talk about, and then certainly get Dr. Janicki in here to talk about the things that he wants to talk about, revolving around not just the book, but about peer support, about getting treated for OCD. So I can't wait to jump in. But here's the admin, a disclaimer for you. This live stream is intended to serve as educational content. It is not intended to replace therapy. For treatment-related questions, please be sure to work with your local provider or contact a local clinician. This live stream, and nor Sean nor I, our crisis hotlines, should not be used if you are in distress or feel unsafe. If you are in a crisis or you ever feeling suicidal or unsafe, please go to your local emergency room, call 911, or call the suicide prevention hotline at 800-273-8255. We also want to create as safe space as possible and be kind and respect everyone. With that, this is being broadcast on various social media platforms and is being recorded, so please be mindful of that as you ask personal questions or leave comments. At the end of the day, we are all here to support one another. So with that, let me introduce myself. If you don't know who I am, actually, if you do know who I am, I'm still the same person. But if you haven't heard my story yet, I am a 58-year-old retired Marine. I'm a lawyer for the Department of the Navy in the United States. I was diagnosed with a severe case of OCD back in 1997 when I was on active duty with the Marine Corps. I was a major at the time. I had suffered for many years not knowing what was wrong with me, then ultimately figuring out that something definitely was not right. And for many years, and I actually attribute this to OCD, but for many years, OCD told me that if I were to be diagnosed with some kind of mental disorder, that I would lose my job with the Marines, I would lose my livelihood as a lawyer, and I would lose my family. And so that prevented me, in addition to the stigma that I felt at the time of somebody having a mental disorder, that prevented me from seeking help. So finally, in October of 1997, on a very memorable day, in the morning, in the dark, I suffered a really severe episode from OCD. And at the end of that episode, and I can get into the details later, but at the end of that episode, I sat in my car and I cried. I figured my life was over. The other options for me were not options. And so I said, I need help. I need somebody to help me. And so that morning I called the Camp Lejeune Naval Hospital. The Navy provides medical services, mental health services for the Marines. And I talked to a psychiatrist. And even that was a show because I threatened the psychiatrist over the phone and said, I think, and I've made all of this up because I was scared, but I said, I think psychiatry and psychiatrists, you're making stuff up just so that you can keep your job, right? You're going to pin something on me. That was all unfair. I went in, I talked to him. he diagnosed me with OCD, put me on medication, and started what I refer to as a rudimentary form of cognitive behavioral therapy back in 1997. So fast forward through that process, I developed a strategy. I didn't do ERP as we know it today, and I, don't even remember the words, the acronym ERP or ACT or anything. I just know that my psychologist gave me some basic advice, and I went out into the world. I didn't need homework because OCD was in my face all the time. Every waking moment, OCD had me. I developed a strategy, and I continued to get better and better and better. In 2003, the psychiatrist that I was seeing, I was now a civilian, had nothing to do with leaving the Marine Corps. I was still a Marine on reserve duty. That psychiatrist I was seeing asked me a question. He said, "How long are you going to be on medication?" And I said, "I'll stay on medication for as long as I need to, right? For the rest of my life, if it means I can deal with OCD." And he got mad at me, and he stood up and he banged his fist on the table. It was an older gentleman, and it shocked me. And I said, "Why is he talking to me like this?" And he said, "I don't know why we think we all have to be so goddamn perfect." He goes, "It's not the medication." He said, "It's your strategy." I had been forgetting to take my medication because I had progressively gotten so much better. Kind of like when you have strep throat and the doctor tells you, "Hey, take this antibiotic for 10 days," and then you feel good by day 6, and then you start forgetting to take the medication. Well, that is what was happening to me. At that point, I recognized that I was just trying to be perfect. And so I added this little nugget to my strategy because I was still having symptoms, but they were few and far between, that I don't have to be perfect at implementing my strategy, and I don't have to be perfect at anything else in my life. I just need to try my best. So the doctor and I weaned me off medication, and I continually and progressively got better and better and better and better. I haven't seen a doctor or taken medication for OCD since 2003. I'm to a point now where OCD doesn't adversely affect my life. And all of that to say, I am neither an advocate for or against medication. I tell people all the time, if medication helps you, do it. Right? It's all about getting to a place where OCD doesn't adversely affect you. So you use whatever techniques are helpful to you. It takes work. I moved from North Carolina to Washington, D.C. in 1998. I had been doing pretty well. I stopped telling people what I had been going through. Nobody knew at the Pentagon where I was working, other than the people that needed to know what I was going through. I just wanted the old Shannon back. And so I kept it to myself. I said, nobody else needs to know that I have OCD. I need to do what I need to do to overcome this disorder. In 2006, I was having dinner with a colleague who knew me pretty well, but she didn't know what I'd been through. And she told me, "Hey, I've got this thing called OCD and it's killing me. I don't know what to do." And I was like, I don't want to tell her, right? I just wanted the old Shannon back. But I did. I said, "Well, there's something that you don't know about me." I told her my story. I told her how I did it. She wrote me about 6 months later and said, "You've changed my life. You need to tell your story." And so that led to my first book. After that first book came out, I got involved with the International OCD Foundation. I started my Facebook page in 2012 that you're on now, where I try to go on as much as I can and write something short and pithy and motivational. I wrote another book in 2014, and then 2015, everything changed. 2015 is actually the beginning of why I wrote this particular book. People on my Facebook page would ask me, "Hey, can you talk on the phone? Because every time we ask you a question, you answer it, we think of two more." And I said, "Sure." So we started talking on my phone. And then I received a call from a friend of mine who's a therapist. And she said she had a friend who was suffering from really severe contamination OCD. And her name is Jen Roy, and she's in the book. Jen was literally starving herself to death. And she wouldn't leave her house because she was afraid of Ebola. And so I told my friend, yeah, I'm happy to talk with her. You know, who knows if she'll talk with me, but she did. And we had a few conversations, and then Jen called me one night trying to eat a plate of macaroni and cheese. And she said, I want to eat this, but I can't. And so we talked about perspective, and we talked about some other things about motivation. She took a bite. She took another bite. So fast forward for Jen. She eats whatever she wants to. She goes wherever she wants to. Her therapist called me and said, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it. She said, if you get trained in this discipline called peer support, then I'll send you people. So I did. I went and got trained, took a 40-hour course in Virginia, got certified. Since that time, that was in early 2016, since that time, I've worked with well over 300 people around the world, virtually, just like this. I developed a model that I use. It's a building block foundation type model where we focus on pillars, and we'll get into those later. But it's been highly successful. I tell everybody that there is no replacement for actual therapy, right? All of the professionals in the world who are trained in the diagnosis and treatment of OCD, you need to consult with them. That's your primary go-to. The peer support piece is an augmentation of that. As much as I say there's nothing like being treated by a therapist trained in the diagnosis and treatment of OCD, all the people that I work with say there's nothing like talking to somebody who understands actually what I'm feeling, who can feel that with me. And so the peer support has been highly successful, and that's why I did this third book, right? It's through that lens. It's about peer support. It's about motivation. It's about hope. The book is unique, and I have to give credit to my good friend, Dr. Jeff Szymanski, who's one of the most brilliant men I know. He said, why don't you include some testimonials in this book? And I said, sure. And I asked people, and they said, yeah, we'd love to. And so the book throughout will have testimonies from people who benefited from this. The other thing that I did, I wanted to make sure that the professional community took a look at this book. So I reached out to my good friend, Dr. Michael Janicki, and said, hey, would you take a look at this book and tell me what you think? And I did the same with Jeff Szymanski. Take a look. What do you think? And I'm not going to speak for them, but both said, we think that this will be helpful. Dr. Janicki will be on later in the broadcast, or whatever we call this, live stream, to talk about that. But that's why I wrote the book, because I think there is this power in peer support that augments actual therapy, where people can find some hope through a common lived experience. All right, so I'll stop talking there. I want to bring in Sean. I can't remember when we met, Sean. It's been a while.
I was trying to think about the same thing. I thought I at first was it 2016 in Chicago?
It must have been.
I think it was. Yeah.
So I got involved with the International OCD Foundation, and I served on their board, and so I met all of these wonderful people. People who suffered from OCD, people who treated OCD, family members. Sean was in that crew. Sean has an amazing story. He's also an incredibly gifted artist and storyteller. When I had the idea for the book, and I said, how many different ways can I tell this story? Because if you read the book and just, I try to explain OCD and techniques in many different ways, because sometimes just explaining something in a different way resonates with somebody, unique. And I said, I would like to see if Sean can help me tell this story. And so I reached out, and he was all in. So let me introduce him in a formal way, and then I want Sean to spend a little time talking about his story, and then we're going to talk about how he came up with the ideas for the art that he put in the book. Because I hear from a lot of people that the artwork just itself tells a story, right? If you didn't read a word of boring Shannon Shy's nonsense, if you just looked at Sean's art through the book, it would tell the story. So let me introduce him, give him the rightful introduction here. Sean works as the advocacy coordinator and creative specialist for McLean Hospital, is an artist and illustrator, and sits on the board of directors for OCD Massachusetts. In his various roles, he helps design and produce accessible educational and creative content to help those addressing their own personal obstacles. Additionally, he is developing the Monster Initiative, which includes the Draw Your Monster project, illustrating books, and speaking publicly about resilience, creativity, and hope. And he's got like 500 titles here. So he's the advocacy coordinator and creative specialist at McLean Hospital, artist. He does freelance, murals, illustration, books, drawings, digital compositions, animations. He's the founder designer for Draw Your Monster. And like I said, he's a public speaker and storyteller. So with that, Sean, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you so much for your contributions to the book. They get more rave reviews than what I wrote. So it's amazing what you do. So tell us a little bit about your story, and then let's talk about your art in the book.
Yeah. First, Shannon, you're making me about as pink as these colors around the border here, and you're making me blush and everything. Also, can you appreciate? I think you pointed this out. Can everybody appreciate the alliteration going on here? Shannon Shy and Sean Shinnock. I mean, you couldn't have been set up perfectly. But yeah, it was. The book has been a great collaboration, but like Shannon's story and like many others, my journey started from somewhere, and as unique as my story has been, it's not too unique from what a lot of other people who have battled this disorder have experienced. And like a lot of people, mine started off when I was really, really young, and worrier kid. I was at first worried about they first started talking about the greenhouse gases back in the 80s, and I latched on to that the world was going to end because of that, and that filled up a lot of my free mental time thinking about that stuff. And then I was worried about the water, and then I got overly obsessed about my mother's health, and I would call her and make sure that she was okay. But for the most part, elementary school, early middle school, I was okay. It wasn't until I had maybe probably, I've had many panic attacks in my life. I think the worst panic attack in what I consider ground zero happened when I was 13 or 14 years old, and I had an intrusive thought about harming someone that I cared very much for. And I was all alone. This was the early 90s, and I just didn't understand why that thought had popped in my head. I thought that it was a reflection of my own identity, who I was as a person on the inside. And I really identified with my own thoughts on it, and I fused tightly to it. And from that night on, through high school and into my early 20s, mid 20s, late 20s, OCD really started to have this pronounced grip around my life. And started off mild to moderate. You know, in high school, I wasn't able to put on my shoes, or wasn't able to put on my pair of pants, because if I didn't do it right, someone would die, or that meant I and there was a lot of and all that stuff, and a lot of neutralizing of these harm emotions that I was having, and it just continued to spin and get bigger and more out of control. And I made a promise to myself way back when I was like 15 or 16, because I was so afraid of these thoughts and what I was thinking, and these behaviors that I was doing, that I told myself that I wasn't going to tell anybody, and counselors included. And so I saw a lot of counselors and therapists late teens and into my 20s. And, you know, we were going through all the anxiety stuff, and I was depressed. I told them that, but I told myself I would never tell them what was actually going on in my head. So for the fear of being, having the police called on me, having, I don't know, being locked up, you hear horror stories. And I'm a little younger than you are, Shannon, but I still grew up in an age where, you know, the stigma was really thick in the 80s and 90s. There's still a lot of, you know, prominent movies that were either exacerbating what actual therapy looked like, or using it for entertainment purposes. And I was just like, you know, I don't want to be like that. So I was quiet. I was quiet in the therapist's office, to my friends, whatever. Now, as I got more and more severe, you could see the actual compulsions and behaviors getting worse and worse. It got to the point where I didn't wear pants for 2 years, because I had to put my leg in through the pant hole, and if it touched either side or any side of the pant, I'd have to start over. And it took me 8 hours, and I still have scars on my legs from the amount of bleeding and blisters. And I was just like, you know what, I'm not going to wear pants at all. And that happened when I was about 30. And that was really the start of where it went from something that I could sort of manage and hide a little bit, to where it went into a severe place. And from about 30 to 32, I was basically, for lack of better words, paralyzed to a chair that I lived in a room in my dad's house upstairs in kind of this attic area. And I basically watched TV and went to the bathroom and ate for 2 years straight. And like you, I kind of got to a breaking point. Up until that point, I had lived my life not thinking that I had any kind of, I don't know if you said this or not, but I'll speak for myself. I had lived my life like I didn't have any sort of future, because I didn't believe I did. I thought I was this horrible person. I had labeled myself a sociopath, a psychopath, someone who was capable of hurting other people. And I was like, so all right, so I'm going to protect other people from me. And so I began to have a lot of avoidant behaviors, a lot of avoidant obsessions, stuff like that. And it got to the point where, you know, I felt like I had some choices, and I not to get overly morbid or anything like that, but I didn't want to die. There was like this hope, and like this some sort of thing driving me forward that I still can't really put words on today. It still drives me forward, even when I'm having really bad days, even today. But it really compelled me forward to take a risk, which is probably one of the first real risks that I took in my life, and that was to ask for help. And I went to my dad, and I didn't know any of this stuff was OCD. Honestly, the behaviors, the thoughts, I thought I was either schizophrenic or delusional or antisocial. I had driven around my hometown like for like 12 hours one day, ready to turn myself into someone, about a week before I actually asked my dad for help. But I hit rock bottom, and I made the fortunate decision to go to him and be like, Dad, I don't know what's going on, but I need help. I need help. Kind of similar to what you did. And you know, my dad loves me, and he's like, all right, let's try to figure this out. And we found, I lived in Ohio at the time. We found a place in Cincinnati called the Linder Center of Hope. We did some neuropsych evaluation, and I decided to just unleash on these poor people. I told them every little thing, like everything that I've been building up, every thought, everything that I'd written in a journal for 14 to 17 years, which I think is the average amount of time it takes to actually get proper treatment for OCD. I fit that mold pretty nicely, and I unleashed for 2 days on these people, and I thought they were going to come back and be like, Mr. Shinnock, your son is a problem and a menace to society, and here are the chains. We're not going to tell you where the key is. Tell him goodbye. And I got lucky, and a really great doctor in the Midwest who ran, I think, OCD Midwest for a while, Dr. Charles Brady, came back to us, and he set us both down and was like, Sean, you have really severe OCD. And I was like, what are you talking about? I don't wash my hands. And I said that because back in my teenage years, the only video that they had of OCD back then in 1993 was a kid washing his hands. And I had ruled that out a long time ago. So I didn't think that was right. So I didn't understand that diagnosis, but I went with it. And he was like, you know, it's so severe that we can't treat you here, but there's some other places around the country that you could go to and get the residential help that you need, the intensive residential help. And my dad and I finally settled on the OCDI here in Boston at McLean Hospital. And
speaking of
great timing.
You're gonna need to go there. Huh?
So I for the first time in my life at age 32, I was at the OCDI in Belmont, and I was finally getting exposure and response prevention daily. I was getting a whole dose of other things. It was really collaborative and a dynamic way of working with the residents. And so I worked with ERP. We did some acceptance and commitment therapy work, and I reconnected with artwork, which I had given up about 20 years earlier because I literally couldn't write anything on a piece of paper. So that was the start of really my significant journey to recovery, which kind of, you know, not to get in too much in the weeds, brings me to about this point. Now, if everybody wants to listen 3 more hours, I can go in more in depth. But
yeah, so thank you so much, Sean, for opening up that way. And so let me make a couple of points, and then I want to talk to Dr. Jenneke here.
Yeah.
First, I believe that people like you and people like me and all of the other advocates, along with the professionals talking about this, helps people make that important decision. I tell everybody, that morning I cried back in 1997, you know, as a Marine in my car, and said my life is over. And I made that phone call to the Camp Lejeune Naval Hospital and talked to a psychiatrist. It was the smartest decision I ever made. Mm-hmm. And Dr. Jenneke and I have talked about this way in the past when we were working on the IOCDF. I had 2 young Navy doctors back in 1997. The psychiatrist, you know, and this was a young guy, he was a lieutenant. He nailed the diagnosis. And Dr. Jenneke said, hey, you know, you were really fortunate that back then that young guy made that diagnosis. Not taking a shot at the Navy, although he was in the Air Force. It was, but
that explains it right there.
Yeah, right. If you look back on it, how fortunate was I? But anyway, I think that us talking about this, everybody talking about it, is going to give somebody else maybe a little breathing room to take that risk to get treated, because OCD is treatable. You know, that's the big secret that should not be a secret. OCD is treatable, and it's guys like Dr. Jenneke. So let me introduce him. So I appreciate everyone has to know. Dr. Janicki actually just flew in back into Boston and did his best to get here to be on this live stream. So I really appreciate that. You are, the giant, the pioneer in this community. I am eternally grateful for, our friendship, but, everything you've taught me about advocacy and all of this. I want to, I could spend hours introducing you. What I want to do is I think if we talk about 3 titles that you have, it tells a lot of the story. And then I'm going to add a 4th title. I hinted at it just a minute ago. You're a professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. You are the founder of the Massachusetts General Hospital Center for Obsessive-Compulsive and Related Disorders, the founder of the McLean Hospital Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder Institute. You have spent 40 years, maybe more, looking into this.
Are you trying to say I can't hold the job?
Yes, no. You are the pioneer, or at least one of the pioneers, and taking the hard scientific clinical look at this disorder and trying to figure out how to bring treatment and relief, and learning how to function even though you have the disorder. Your work is renowned around the world. When you speak, people listen. So I want to welcome you tonight. I'm going to ask you.
Sean?
Say what?
Sean's listening.
Yeah, Sean's listening. The 4th title I'm going to give you is your Air Force time. Really appreciate your service to the country. What I was hoping to do tonight, so you did something incredible, I think, for trying to deliver the message of this book. And I'm not here to ask you to advertise my book, but I was touched by your response to me after I asked you to skim it. And you told me, hey, look, I can skim it, but I'm busy right now. I don't know that I can read it. And then you wrote, ultimately, you told me, say, I read the whole thing. And then I asked you to write the foreword. It could be brief. And you said, once you started reading it, you were compelled to read it more carefully, and you thought it would be helpful to people. Before we go there about the book, would you mind just giving the audience, for people who are family members or anybody else who's sort of thinking, hey, I might have this disorder, can you give us a brief 101 in your best way to explain it to the world? Because we're going to have people following us around the world on this thing. So let us know how you explain this to families and others.
Well, as you know, I can go for days talking about this. And after like 5 minutes, that's not particularly helpful. I think if people are here, they probably have an idea they have OCD, or someone in their family has OCD. So they probably know a lot about it already. But the main things are, you can have thoughts that get stuck in your head. And I can talk about those for a couple hours too. But if you have something stuck in your head that goes over and over, that probably is OCD. Or if you get stuck doing some kind of behaviors that don't make a lot of sense, like checking doors, checking lights, washing. Washing is probably the most common one, but checking is probably almost as common. If you do these repetitive things over and over again, don't know exactly why you do them, but if you don't do them, there's a lot of anxiety or bad feelings that you probably have OCD. And the bottom line is that it's treatable. When I started with this, working with people with this disorder, I had come from the world of dementia. I mostly worked with Alzheimer's patients. And then I saw a few OCD patients, and I thought they were really fascinating. And they were all nice people. None of them things that were just totally bizarre. And they knew they were bizarre, but they couldn't stop. And I think the thing that I couldn't stand people that suffered. My mother suffered a lot from some things, and I grew up with that, and I ended up taking care of her a lot. to give my father a break. And if people suffer, that just drives me nuts. So I have to do something about it. So that's kind of why I do this. And everybody that has OCD is suffering. And if you can do anything to lessen that suffering, it makes your life worthwhile. I mean, what else is worthwhile in life than if you can help people? That seems like the most useful thing you can do. Yeah, I just got back from Florida with a fellow who I hadn't actually seen for the last 6 or 7 years, but he lived in a hole in his backyard for 9 years, if you can believe that. And amazingly nice guy, very interested guy. We just took up and started talking like we had only missed a day. And he calls them behaviors, I think. And he says people have told him he has idiosyncratic behaviors, which he does, but he's not crazy. Very nice guy. He would like to help. He'll help people out. And I think he's happy now. And that's like really rewarding to see.
Yeah, well, so I tell everybody, as much as I do peer support and all of that, I mean, it is the people in your community, Dr. Janicki, who saved my life. And that is not an exaggeration, because by the time I was diagnosed, I was basically non-functioning. And having been in the military, it's not okay not to show up to work, right? Yeah. So I had to go to work every day. And as I went out, I lived 11 miles away from my office at Camp Lejeune from my house. It's not an exaggeration that it would take me an hour to get there, because there was always something, the next thing. I would wake up just exhausted already, thinking, what am I going to have to face today? And then, and I want to talk a little bit about, treatment. So let's go to that next thing, because I can talk a lot about hope and motivation and what I do to help people that way. But I think coming from you, Dr. Janicki, and Sean, you can weigh in on this, but I think people need to know from the scientific community, from the medical community, is this disorder treatable?
Well, let me say this. The people that do the very best that have this disorder are the people that when they start to do better, or they do better, they turn around and help other people like you and like Sean. And those are the people that do the best of all in their own lives. So by helping other people, I think you'll agree with this, both of you probably, by helping other people, you really help yourself. I mean, I'm sure that I'm helping myself. I don't actually have OCD, unfortunately, but by helping other people, it makes my life better. It gives me a purpose, and it's the same thing for you guys. And if we're all pushing forward to help other people, I think the world would be a lot better place.
Yeah, I think that, and Sean, don't let me dominate this conversation, but one of the reasons why I asked Dr. Janicki and Dr. Szymanski to take a look at the book is because I wanted the professional community to embrace this idea of peer support, right? It's another tool that can be used. But I also didn't want to say anything that offended the professional community. And so the way I write about it in the book is, these are the reasons why people have told me they've come to me, right, for this thing called peer support. And they include a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, but also as again, the professional community saved my life. But people tell me that there are things, that professionals who are not trained in the diagnosis and treatment of OCD, and I think that's key, right? A lot of what you've done, Dr. Janicki, over the years is try to get people trained in how to treat this disorder, right? It's one of the most debilitating disorders on the planet, but it's treatable.
The other thing is that I don't have the disorder. We don't have the disorder. So I learn a lot from you and the other patients. What I know, I didn't learn from books mostly. I just got fascinated with the patients and just started to see everybody I could. And then when I work with someone, most of the people I follow up with them. I'll call them in a month or 2 months or a year. So I have probably hundreds of patients who I have seen over time. And then I get an idea of what's likely to work. And you can make one sentence with a person over email, tell them where to go to get help. And you can see them 5 years later, and they'll say, like you said, that changed their life, getting to someone who knew what they were doing. So I answer all my emails because you never know who is going to benefit from that. And all the time when I go to meetings, people come up to me and say, you sent me an email 5-10 years ago, and it changed my life. I mean, that's incredibly rewarding.
Absolutely.
Then I asked them, I said, did you pay me for it? No, just kidding.
Yeah.
So I hear that all the time, though. That's not an exaggeration.
Right. Well, and I some people come to me and they tell me, my doctor asked me to do something that I wasn't ready to do yet. Right. My doctor doesn't completely understand what I'm actually going through. So I think that's important when you say, hey, we have to learn from that.
I don't actually know what you're going through.
And
I've seen thousands of patients, but I don't really get it.
Right.
The hardest thing to understand is when I see someone and they get better, they kind of say like, well, I have no idea how I could have thought like that. And then if they relapse, they go right back to the same thing as if they were never better.
Right.
Like something switches in their head, and you're going from understanding OCD to having OCD again. There's something happens there that I don't really understand. I just know it does happen.
Well, I think that and again, because a lot of people come to me and they say that the therapist they were dealing with wasn't really trained in the diagnosis and treatment of OCD. And they come away with this idea that you're going to be, and the doctor told them this, you're going to be in misery forever. Right. There isn't anything you can do. And you're like, are you kidding me? What?
That was a common thought in the old days.
Right. And so it's people like you, and I think it's people like Sean and I to try to spread this message. The disorder is treatable. You got to do the work.
Yeah.
You got to do the work. And that's where I come in the hope and motivation piece. But you got to do the work. But it's critical. I think the message I would send to everybody who suffers from OCD, talk to somebody who's trained in the diagnosis and treatment of OCD. Right? You start at a huge advantage if that's where your treatment starts, because you study it. And then people like Sean and I can fill in the gaps and tell people, hey, we got it. We understand what you're doing. Let me shift gears real quick, Doctor. I want to go back to Sean for a second here and talk a little bit about his motivation in creating the artwork for the book. Because again, I don't know if you were on when I said this, but his artwork, one, is just so incredible anyway. It's why I reached out to him, but it tells a story in and of itself. So Sean, let me ask you, one, why did you agree to do it? Secondly, what was your thinking as you and I were working together in creating this art?
Well, honestly, the first reason was frankly you, Shannon. I mean, you've been someone I had known about for at least 6 years before I knew you or I met you, and you were someone who I had followed and respected immensely before you and I even shook hands. And I think we shook hands the first time in 2016, and then I think we saw each other again in Austin, Texas, and you met my father. And you hung around, and you and I got a little bit closer, and it's solidified what I was already thinking about who you are as a character and what you're trying to accomplish. And for you to reach out to me felt not like a business proposal, but more of an honor and a collaboration.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, sweet.
And it was a decision that was easy for me to make. I've had people come to me for other work that I wasn't really excited about, and I was excited about this. You had given me the script or the transcript about 2 months before we started talking about the artwork, and like Dr. Jenneke, I had started it thinking I would like it, and like just try to get the main points. So I ended up reading the whole thing, and I just thought there was a lot of promise, and I frankly saw a lot of myself in not everything, but a lot of things that you went through. A lot of the descriptions in the chapters of what you went through personally before you get to your peer support strategies was really, I'm getting goosebumps right now, really powerful to me. And I felt like it would be a really would be a really important experience for me to have to help flesh some of these ideas out visually for you. So
okay, so
that was good. Yeah.
no, I appreciate that. So let's talk big pictures and
Yeah.
little pictures, right? The big
Right.
pictures were my idea. The little pictures were your idea.
Yeah.
And
So
I think it actually came together quite nicely.
it came together really nicely. Shannon first came to me and was like, I want to put some visual elements to this. I think it's really important to go alongside the forward from Jenicky and the really, really important testimonials that I have. And I want to put, I want to put a little visual to this stuff. And you originally came to me for only three images. And I was, I kind of thought about it, and I was like, yeah, we could do that, but I really want to be able to like have the reader tie in everything together, like it flows smoothly from chapter to chapter, so they're not seeing an image and then forgetting about it while they go through a whole nother scenario or strategy and then seeing another one, and kind of like I wanted it to be more of incorporated into the artwork. So I came back with, all right, let's do the three big images that you'll see in the book. And I didn't come up with this idea. A lot of other books that I enjoy, there's a couple different book series that I loved growing up. One notably was Harry Potter, and she had her artist, whoever she hired, do these little thumbnail sketches at the very beginning of the chapters. And these little thumbnail sketches kind of gave you a little foreshadowing into what was coming up, sort of some metaphor, some foreshadowing that's gonna, before you start reading the words, you kind of maybe get a sense or a feeling or a vibe. Especially one of my favorite ones, and I can show these when we get more to showing the artwork, was the chapter where you start describing your worst moment at 5:45 in the morning when you're driving to work and having that experience, and me recreating that I thought was really powerful. And for someone to see a thumbnail of a car stopped at a light, they have no clue what that is, but it's sort of ominous and sets it up nicely for them to get into and be like, oh, wow, okay, all right, that's what he went through. That, so I like little interludes into chapters like that, and you really like the idea, so we went with it. And I think we did 15 in total, 12 smaller thumbnails to start the chapters off, and then 3 bigger images.
So that was really interesting for me. Actually, it was somewhat therapeutic, because Sean would come back after reading a chapter of the book and say, this is what stuck out to me. This was the thing, right? So on the peer support one, I thought there's a little line in there where I talk about, peer support. Imagine you and me coming to the precipice of a canyon, and the only way across that canyon is a rickety old bridge, and it's dilapidated and it looks risky, and you see me do it. Mm-hmm. And now it's your turn. And so you captured that completely, right? That was only like one line in that chapter of that, but it captured the whole chapter. And the bigger images, that was my idea, but it tells the story. So the first one is the windy road through the forest. That's the journey. Mm-hmm. And you'll see that on the, in the back set of the cover of the book. But the other two were more powerful for me. And I talk to people about this all the time, is imagine yourself laying in the fetal position on your floor with your arms over your head, and this monster called OCD just beating the hell out of you, and you feel helpless and hopeless. Mm-hmm. And then you finally understand, again, this is where the treatment world comes in for Dr. J. There's something that you can do about it.
Yeah.
You can stand up. You take charge, right? So ultimately, the big message in the book, the big message for anybody I would ever talk about with OCD is your recovery belongs to you. You have the key to it, right? That's the great little secret. You
This is
have
why
the
what
key
you
to
do
it.
is so important, because doctors are not necessarily good at this part, getting people to believe them.
Right. And that's where all of this comes from. So that was the other two images. One was a woman laying in the fetal position on the floor with this monster OCD over her. And then as we get into, I think, the strategy piece of the book, it's the woman standing up and OCD laying on the floor.
Yeah.
Such a powerful image. And when people understand that, right, it's you.
Right.
It's that binary choice, right? You rise above the details, because OCD can change details like crazy. Rise above the details, and it's a binary choice. Am I going to do what makes OCD weaker? Am I going to do what makes OCD stronger? And I've got really good reasons to do what makes OCD weaker.
Yeah.
Right. And I believe this completely, and feel free to disagree, but I think you'll both agree. With all the uncertainty in OCD world, we know two things for certain. One, if you do the things that make OCD stronger, you will be back in the hell pit. If you do the things that make OCD weaker, you are taking steps towards recovery. And I've seen it in my life. Sean saw it in his life. Dr. J, you see it all the time with people.
Do you ever feel like you could relapse?
So here's my, people. So OCD doesn't affect me anymore. I went from, so before I was diagnosed, harm OCD, feeling responsible for the safety of other people, moral scrupulosity, got diagnosed. And then the day after I was diagnosed, I read in a bookstore two things. One demoralized me. The second one devastated me. The first one I read was OCD cannot be cured. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I spilled my guts to this Navy doctor who can kick me out of the Marine Corps. And he didn't say a word about this can't be cured thing.
What idiot said you couldn't get cured?
I'm sorry?
You don't have to say his name, but that was a doctor that wrote that? You can't be cured?
It was the first book I picked up in the bookstore. I don't even know what the title was, but it said OCD cannot be cured.
That was my advantage in medical school and residency, that I never tend to listen to anybody. Been like that my whole life.
Yeah.
I had to figure out my own way. So
on
that's
that
what
point,
I was told too.
Yeah, well, and the second thing I read was people with OCD can have violent and sexual thoughts about children. I had not had one. I had two little boys, and you know what happened. I was like, oh my God, I can't have that thought. That almost led to my demise. That whole train. And so OCD went from, from what I had to violent and sex, religion, homosexuality, and then finally relationship with my wife. So I talk about that in this book about and why we talk about it, because I think it's important for people to know. On the cure piece, I confronted my psychiatrist and said, you didn't say anything about this. And he said, look, I don't want you to get hung up on this subject of cure. He goes, the professional community, they debate this topic of cure. They don't even know what necessarily causes OCD, much less whether it can be cured. And then he gave me the nugget, and this saved my life. He says, what I want you never to forget is that it's possible to get to a place where you can live virtually symptom-free, right? It's possible to get better. And I said to myself at that very point, I go, if that's true, I'll do whatever it takes. I'll do whatever you tell me to do, doc. You tell me. I'll do it. And I didn't even know it was true, but it was the thing I kept thinking about in my own recovery when I was trying to do the very difficult work of, pushing through anxiety and dealing with these thoughts that kept changing. I said, remember what your doctor said. This is a much better option than the other options. At least let's try this, right? This is noble for your two sons, right? They were my driving force. They need their dad back.
There's suffering either way, if you give into it or if you try to resist it.
Right.
Trying to resist it will take you somewhere, hopeful, where things will be better.
That's that binary choice, right? You know, you got a choice. I can voluntarily agree to be in the hell pit, or I can at least try. So that's where I went. So I got to a much better place now. I'm not affected by it. The last true OCD episode I had was in 2010, just about the time when I met you back with the IOCDF conference. I was in Hawaii. And I just, I said, look, the strategy I think is working, so let's keep doing it. People ask me all the time right now, are you cured? And I say, I don't speak about that term cure like we think of curing cancer or anything like that. I said, my honest feeling and answer about this is I don't care if OCD comes back, because I know what I'll do if it does, right? That's part of the strategy piece. What do I do when OCD taps me on the shoulder? That's what I spend a long time in the book about, in addition to hope and motivation, but it's what do I do? It's that action piece. Going back to, I control this destiny because I can do something. I'm not helpless or hopeless, right? So working with my therapist.
That book hits all the points where doctors get stuck, helping patients.
So there is an art in what we do. I did have I received a question earlier today, Dr. Janicki, and I don't want to go back on my word because I said I would ask you about it. And I think at some point we need to move into some Q&A here. I was asked about BDD. So if you could talk about, just generally OCD and related disorders and the just thumbnail stuff here, the different ways, that the science looks at this, medical community looks at this, and what people could be looking out for.
You said BDD?
Yeah. Body dysmorphic disorder. Yeah. I apologize.
The BDD is probably related, overlaps with OCD sometimes, but it's probably the most likely psychiatric disorder to lead people to hurt themselves. They commit suicide. So it has to be taken very, very seriously. And everyone's a little bit different. Then you have to figure out, what kind of approach you can have. So there's a couple of really good books. If anybody wants to email me, maybe I should give out my email address.
Yeah, please.
I can send you references. Sabina Wilhelm and Kathy Phillips have written some books on BDD, and there are others as well. My email, if you want any information, is this Jenike, JENIKE, at comcast.net, N-E-T. Be sure to put net and not com. So if you send me something, Jenike, comcast.net, I can send you some articles or chapters or information. I've been collecting things for 100 years, it seems like. And I can send you things on that. The thing about BDD and OCD, it's not just like a very simple explanation of what you need to do. But if you read a couple of chapters, you can kind of get the gist of it. But with BDD, you really should see an expert if it's significant BDD, and not just try to wing it on your own.
I think, well, that's a great point. One to drive home for BDD, but again, going back to what we've been talking about for the last hour, is if you believe that you suffer from OCD or a related disorder, if you have a family member that you believe is suffering, the best thing to do is to seek treatment from somebody trained in the diagnosis and treatment of OCD. I know the International OCD Foundation, so this is a cheap plug, but their website, iocdf.org, has all kinds of resources and listed people on there to go see. There's even a sample questionnaire that you can actually use to question the therapist that you're going to see.
You put in your location and what you're looking for, and they will pump out a bunch of names. What they did, I gave them I've been doing this for years. I gave them all of my contact information, and they probably quadrupled it now. And they have the people in Canada and Europe and all around the world. So really, I go there to find caregivers. So if someone says my mother's in North Dakota and she's a mess, has OCD, who can treat her? I will go there, or I'll tell them to go there and look at the person. If you can't find anybody, people can email me and I'll try to find somebody. I don't mind looking through the list.
Which is why I love you, and I think that it's the power of this community for people willing to take that extra step to try to help others. Again, the message of hope that I bring to the table, that Sean brings to the table, that you, Dr. Janicki, bring to the table is we've experienced it. You know, you've been instrumental in bringing people out of that help it. That's how I describe OCD, as a help it.
Oh, absolutely.
But it's treatable, and get treatment, right? That's the point. And so, you know, going back to what I do, I help a lot of people who are in treatment or they've decided to quit treatment, and I'm trying to get them back into it. But it's that little hope and motivation piece to say, come on.
You know, I know quite a few people that you've seen, and you do an amazing job. And I actually try to refer people to you. In fact, I started to give out your book with your permission before it came out, and all those people wanted to see you. See, you could have the biggest practice in the world if you wanted. So I think it's you have the knack. You use what you've learned, and you put it all together in a way that you can help people. And I could tell from reading the book that you had waded through the weeds, and it wasn't just like superficial. You had really thought it through, which was amazing. I didn't know you were that deep thinker.
Well, that's all a game. But I mean, I was honored the fact that you decided to write it.
I can't fake it like that.
No, I'm honored that you decided to write the foreword. I know you're a busy man and you help a lot of people, but again, your words were touching to me and saying I was compelled to read this thing carefully. Right, it's some new insight here, and I'm not saying that to brag on myself.
I started to skim it.
Right.
And then I realized what I was reading. I wanted to read it all, so I just read the whole book. I didn't really have time to do it, and I didn't want to do it. People give me books all the time to read, and rarely read them. But I started to read it, and it was so to the point of what I needed to know to help people, and what people needed to know to get better. That I just read the whole thing. It was fantastic. Actually, in my mind right now, this is the best book that someone with OCD could read.
Oh, well, that's very generous of you to say. So let me do this. I think we
cost you a little bit in commission.
That's fine. Sean and I have a deal that he's taking care of all that. So
yeah, right.
Okay. So let me see if we have any questions here. No questions so far. Just lots of comments. That's good.
Maybe no one's watching. We're the only three here.
No, there's a bunch of people on here, including people who don't have OCD that I know. I see, I'm going to call her out. Jennifer says, yay, Dr. Janicki. So you know who she is.
The Jennifer we know?
Yep. I already talked about her. She was actually the one. Well, here's a question. We can talk offline about whether we all want to do a bi-weekly Q&A support webinar, but I don't know that we'll have to talk about that. Lots of confirmations. Okay, so let me just say this. So I'm getting a lot of comments about saying hello to you two from people that we know. If anybody out there has any questions that you want to follow up with me, and I'll contact Dr. Janicki and Sean. My email is shannonshy@gmail.com. The book itself is available on Amazon. Just type in Shannon Shy and Turning Points, and it'll pop up. The other thing that I'm doing, and this is the final thing that I'll say. I hate to be a salesman, but one of the things I learned through all the peer support I've done with well over 300 people around the world is folks that I worked with would make little Post-it notes of one-liners that we talk about, and then they would post it somewhere, whether it was motivational or a technique or something. And so the last chapter in the book is called Quick Reminders for Success, right? The go-to list. And what I've done in addition to that chapter is I'm going to be, I've developed a deck of cards, 32 cards, that has basically the face of the book on it. And then on the back, there are 32 different, there you go, Fran put it up, 32 different little sayings that people can actually pull out of their pocket, depending on the day, depending on the issue, whatever they want, but a little bit of motivation. So those will be going on sale. I'll put more information about where that's going to be. But I've been told that a lot of sufferers think that this is going to be really helpful, right? Just something that they can pull out of their card, or out of their wallet or whatever. So let me first, before I forget, let me thank Fran Harrington of the IOCDF. Fran is one of the most amazing IT thinkers in the world that I've met, and I've met a lot of people who do some pretty cool things. Fran volunteered basically to help us run this thing tonight, which I was nervous about, because I was like, if this is left to me, we're going to be doing the old Flintstone, little bird pecking on a piece of wood. So Fran, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Let me see if Dr. J or you, Sean, if you have any closing comments, any words of hope, motivation that you want to share with the audience. Let me go to Sean first.
Oh, right on the spot, huh? No, I think we talked a lot about community and helping each other here, and as I've read Turning Points, especially the first chapter, and especially the first image that I drew for you, Shannon, and we had decided on the old bridge, and how in the image it's basically a man who I based loosely off of you, who has crossed this bridge and is standing there almost waiting, hasn't gone any further, but has done some work and is waiting for others to follow that in his footsteps, and looking off. I think he's looking off to the left or whatever. There's no really reason or anything behind that, but the bridge has changed for me a little bit. Originally, I had looked at it as a way of describing the journey and how things can be rough, especially over this really scary ravine, and taking the risks of going through recovery, going through therapy, asking people for help, having bad days, having good days. But it's changed its significance for me as not just being a bridge that represents the footstep or following the footsteps of someone who's been there before you over something scary, but as a bridge that you, as a peer support specialist, help build for people. And again, specifically me, had I had someone who would have built a bridge for me when I was so young and refusing to talk about my symptoms because I was so scared of psychiatry and mental health. If I had someone there to help me with a bridge over into that place that was a little bit compassionate, I think I would have walked it, and I think that would have changed my life.
Yeah, why don't you throw that up real quick? I want people to see some of your artwork, and then Dr. J, I won't keep you too much longer, but I want people to see Sean's artwork real quick.
Are we seeing it?
Yeah, it's at the bottom. It's not there. Okay, now you can show the full. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
So this is it.
Go ahead.
And this is the very first thumbnail image that starts off the peer support journey that Shannon talks about. And so this bridge has changed and evolved in meaning for me, and it's gotten more and more personal, to be honest with you. So this was one of my favorite to draw, not just because it was the first one, but it hit home for me very personally. So
yeah, well, that's awesome. Yeah, so as a teaser, this is indicative of the artwork that's in this book. I mean, it's amazing. It tells a story. I'm touched every time I see it. So okay, let me go back to Dr. Janicki real quick. Sir, you have a large platform around the world, not only for sufferers and families, but also therapists, right? So it's like the old E.F. Hutton commercial.
I'm trying to shine up a little bit more in my old age.
Yeah, but if Janicki says that people listen, everybody listens. I'm honored that you wrote the foreword for the book, right? So it kind of tears me up, but this live stream is going to get recorded and people will watch it around the world. What would you tell people who suffer, or their family members or therapists, right? What's the message after your long career in helping people out of this hell pit that is OCD? What's your message to people?
Well, to tell you the truth, even though most of what I do, or a lot of what I do, is OCD, I don't really think about OCD as my main job. I think if you look at the world, it's a mess. Everything you look at is a mess, and we have good people working with this. The patients that have OCD and the doctors can do something about a messy world. And one thing you can do is sort of clean up disease. I go back to suffering because that's what I started out with. What are people suffering from? You know, if I see a 20-year-old kid who has cancer and OCD, and he tells me he'd rather die of the cancer and get rid of the OCD, that the OCD wasn't as bad as the cancer. And I saw a couple of kids like that, and one of them did die. I mean, that's really gets you. So as I get older, I feel like I should do something with my life. And I said, well, why don't I just do what I'm doing? Because it seems like this is very rewarding. So if I get another OCD patient, we can figure out what to do to make their life better. It's all the more reasonable. As you know, last year I almost died. I had cancer for many months, and they told me at the first few months that I would be dead in a few months. But I fooled them. They used this strong treatment, and the treatment almost killed me. And then I come out of it, and I really feel like now I'm back to almost normal. And I feel like, and I asked them, thinking about, like, what am I going to do with my life now? I just turned 76, so I probably have a few years left. And I said, well, why don't I just do what I've been doing? And that, to me, seemed very rewarding. And that's what I'm going to keep doing. So if we all just do something that my expertise, I guess, is in OCD and related things. If I use those skills to improve other people, that we can sort of make the world a better place to live, because it really is a mess now. I've been around a long time. I've never seen anything as messy as it is right now. So,
amen.
But I think, alleviate suffering. And the other key thing is that if you get better and you start to do better, turn around and help other people. Always help other people, whatever situation you're in, and that will make your life so much better. Just that one thing all by itself.
Well, that's amazing. Both of you are amazing. The last thing I would leave people with is action is your ally. Action is your ally. It helps you in OCD recovery, and it helps you in life, right? Doing something that helps you in OCD recovery helps you in life. Doing something in your life to move your life forward helps you in OCD recovery. Think of it that way, right? They are symbiotic. So it is possible to get better. Hope you enjoyed this live stream. Again, thanks to Fran Harrington. Thank you to the IOCDF for everything that they do. If you need more information about resources, go to iocdf.org. Hopefully we can do something like this similar in the future. So out from Virginia. Thank you both.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Fran.
Thank you.